we can use that to assist our clients a little better. So with that, I'm sorry, with Todd, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more and introduce Ron to the rest of us?
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. While you're getting your lunch and getting ready to sit down, I'll just start out with a few of the, like I like to say, the housekeeping issues, and welcome to everybody who's online. Thank you for joining us, and Brian and David for putting this together. I know it's been months in the making. So yes, I'll quickly on myself. I'm one of the partners at Braun International and Premier Estates International Real Estate. Our headquarters are in Los Angeles. We work throughout the US, Mexico, Caribbean, England, and Canada. We value, broker, and auction real estate, partnership interests in real estate, and provide specialty sale platforms from everything from $70 million residential properties to $100 million hotels, all the way down to plots of land out in India. Our company is well over 100 years old. We work in a lot of very distinct industries, be it trust and estate. I mean, even within your firm, we work for many of your partners and associates that are in bankruptcy, trust and estate, entertainment. Today's presentation is purely about real estate, but we serve in many other different disciplines within our company. I will just tell you personally, for some of you who know me, I see a couple names on this screen that I've had the pleasure to talk with over the years. Sid Machdinger was our family counsel. I grew up and lived right next door to him. So he was very, very close to my father, and your firm is we've been working with personally for 40 plus years. So I didn't know if Brian knew that or not. I am, as one of the partners, I'm also a real estate transaction or broker. I'm an appraiser by training. I also have an auction background. David Jaffe, who's also one who Brian's worked with for years. David's been with us for, I think it's probably nearly 25 years. David's got a tremendous background in real estate transactional side, and a very structured approaches to selling real estate, whether it's dissolution, partnership, family problems, lender issues. We are literally like the go-to company to solve problems that you all are involved with every single day in your business and with your clients. So a lot of time it starts purely with a valuation, but it ends with some sort of structured sale for the property, for the partnership interest, maybe an auction. I could go on and on. Today's presentation, and I'll try to pepper some examples as well through it, is about real estate valuation. And I will be the first to say that I am amazed at how I find working with attorneys of all different disciplines, how little really is understood about valuation and how to use it to your benefit. And really part of this is how to use it in your benefit, whatever that might very well be. So that's our focus. So follow along on the presentation. If you would, this is just some quick information on our companies. Braun International, as you can see, deals with all types of commercial real estate. Premier Estates is our residential group, and we sell homes traditionally, non-traditionally, via auction, divorce, bankruptcy, receivership. For lenders, you name it, we do it. And we're generally the out-of-box approach to solving your problem. So getting into real estate appraisals, and for anybody that's in the conference room, if you have a question during the presentation, please put your hand up or just start, just butt in. And anybody who's in your own computer, I guess you could take yourself off mute and just ask a question. I'm happy to answer the questions as we go. One of the first things on appraisals that is a common question is, what is your qualification? And by the way, this doesn't just apply to real estate. It applies to operating businesses, doing discount valuations, personal property, specialty assets, and we are a full service valuation firm. We don't just value real estate. So there are different designations for different disciplines, and it is good to understand what those are. But I will tell you, most of you probably know, because most people say, and they like to joke about it, MAI, made as instructed. Well, that may or may not be true, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But there are different designations. Our appraisers are all at the highest level, and I will tell you the highest level of valuation credential for real estate is a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and that is a discipline that is accepted for valuation of real estate throughout the world, not just the United States. And the Appraisal Institute has a partnership with with the Charter Surveyors. But every appraiser within the state who appraises of really any level should at a minimum have a CGREA, which is sort of certified general, and that's state license. Some of our appraisers are state licensed, but they really focus on residential. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. So, but we are all guided, and this is important for you to understand, we're all guided by USPAP. USPAP is the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. And that is what guides our ethics, our how we appraise, what we say, what we do. USPAP is a guideline for every appraiser at every level. So USPAP is our kind of I guess, bar association, our ethics guideline. Getting into appraisals, and again, there's so many aspects to appraising, but one of the first things we talk about is when we're engaged, the first question we would be asking you is, what's the purpose of the appraisal? Who's going to see it? What are you trying to accomplish with the appraisal? Is it for a buy-sell? Is it for financing? Is it for dissolution or death? What have you? So the intended use has to be in the appraisal. And I would say to you, when we're engaged outside of the world of estate and trust and outside of the world of lender, probably 80% we're engaged by the law firm for obvious reasons. Those are our stats. Most importantly is a data valuation, right? We can value a property at any point in time. And whether it's a retrospective value, a current value, potentially a future value, a value for the fair rental, for the rental income, the fair rental value analysis. These are all different types of, or different terms and components to the purpose of the appraisal that will ask, and what we need will help you answer the question yourself, and what it is you're trying to accomplish, and we'll guide you along as best we can. Types of appraisals, this is a biggie. There used to be in the old world, for some of you who have gray hair like me, there were many, many different types of appraisal formats. The Appraisal Foundation has changed it to essentially 3, and you see them up on your screen. Restricted does not mean what you think it means. It is not who can read the appraisal report. That's listed in the engagement agreement. Restricted is what is in the appraisal report, the level of information, as well as the level of information, the analysis, comparables, and so on. An appraisal report is a full report, meaning it has everything under the sun. And we like to say more information than anybody would ever read. in most cases in your world, more information as you would ever need and want to pay for. So restricted appraisal reports generally are a little more cost effective than an appraisal report. Form appraisal or what we call URARE reports are for residential. Any questions? Okay. On your screen, the cost approach. So I'm going to talk about the approaches to valuation. For some of you, this might be pretty cursory information, but please pay attention to this. Cost approach, there's three approaches to value: the cost approach, the income approach, and the market approach. Depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you may need one, two, or all three approaches. We're right now valuing a house that has been partially gutted and is now in litigation because of issues between partners and lenders. And as such, the property is essentially a shell. So we were tasked to not only provide one other approach, but the cost approach. And the cost approach is about the cost to either build or to develop an opinion on the improvements or the cost of data to build or develop or redevelop that property. I will tell you, for lawyers like yourself, it's rare that we do cost approach. Mostly that's done for insurance or possibly construction defect. Mostly we are doing the income approach that we'll talk about next and the market approach. The income approach, of course, is what you probably all understand it to be, and that's analyzing the income for the property as part of the overall analysis in the approach to value. Now, the income provided can be quite deep that we would request. P&Ls, rent rolls, earnings potential, pro forma information, depending on the type of property. You know, we could give you quite a deep laundry list of requests that we would use to derive the income approach. One thing I want to say is, in an appraisal report that you would see the income approach summary, you would see the market approach summary, and you would see the cost approach summary. And then the appraiser weights those different approaches to arrive at a singular value. So income is very important. And I can tell you, when we do work for your trust and estate partners, and they tell us, well, we don't have the current income, we can't get the current income, or, the person is, they were managing the property in the back of the napkin, and the income isn't that great, and it's under market by 20%. Well, depending on what you're trying to achieve, you may not want to use the income approach for your appraisal. So again, obviously, what you hear from me, and are going to hear over and over in this presentation, is the valuation can be tailored to what you're trying to achieve. Our job is to try to give you the information accordingly so you can do as you need to. The next approach, and the most common approach to everybody, is the sales comparison approach. Now, the sales comparison approach, and you have to remember something, an appraiser is going to appraise as of a date, but everything is in history, right? I know you're all experts in the real estate world, so right now we're appraising an office building in San Francisco that at one point was $140 million, and there are literally zero comps. The building's probably worth 60 million, but that's here nor there. There's no comps. So the appraiser has to make tremendous assumptions and adjustments, and the data points that we pull in the past are going to guide the appraiser. But there's something else when it comes to the sales comparison approach. We are, and you may not know this, USPAP has certain guidelines regarding future dates that are in the future versus what is current as of, let's say you asked us to appraise the property as of today. And we found some properties that are on the market for sale. They have not transacted. We can include those in the appraisal. And that's what's current. It hasn't sold. It's not what happened in the past. Why is that important? Because for some purposes that you may need, you may really want to know what's the value of that property today if we or another broker were to sell the property. We get that question put to us at least 15 times a week. So, it is a, if we're selling a house in, in Sherman Oaks, well, that's easy. There's comps more or less weekly. But if we're selling a $50 million home out in Malibu, the last comp may be 7-8 months ago. Well, we all know that the real estate market has gone up, has been turned upside down in the past year. So the comps may not exist, or the income has changed. And of course, we'll talk about in a few minutes, the cap rates have changed. So the sales comparison approach is here to give you the most accurate approach to the value of the property purely based upon comps. Anybody have any questions? Okay. Appraisals are used for many different reasons. We talked about that. I don't think I need to get into that. The objectives of the client will drive the choice of the appraisal. I touched on this before. What is important for all of you is to keep in your mind, what are you trying to achieve? What is the goal? Who's going to see the appraisal? And how are you going to use it to your benefit? And the scrutiny and in valuation, when it's used for partnership dissolution or for trial or whatever, and our appraisal may be used or looked at by another appraisal firm. So you have two sides getting appraisals done. So there's one opinion of value, there's another opinion of value. And I guess that's a good point I should bring up now. For those of you who use appraisals in your negotiation process or when you're writing documents for buy-sell or what have you, the biggest mistake I can tell you that we see is when we're tasked with an operating agreement or a requirement that there are different parties and one side gets an appraisal, the other side gets an appraisal, and then if the two parties don't agree on a buy-sell or whatever it is on the values that were provided by those two appraisers, a third appraiser is chosen by the two appraisal firms, and then the third appraiser's opinion is used, and the other two appraisals are thrown out. I can tell you that is the worst approach I have ever dealt with in any kind of situation or any kind of court. I cringe. We're dealing with it right now with a good client of ours, and it's through a lease negotiation. And the problem you have here is twofold in the example I gave you. First, there's nothing wrong with getting another firm to do an appraisal for the other side to get their opinion. Okay, very common. The mistake is that first you're letting two appraisal firms try to pick the third appraiser. That in itself is unbelievably difficult and can burn a lot of money and time trying to get to that decision. The worst decision is allowing the third appraiser to be the final opinion of value. I would say to you, take the average of the three, or take a percentage, a delta between the three, but use all three to arrive at that final price. But the last thing you want to do is trust a third appraiser that neither side controls and could be, quite frankly, a wild card. And without averaging, and remember one of the important things I say about appraising is one person's opinion of value. You put 20 appraisers in a room, and I promise you, you'll get 20 opinions of value. Absolutely 20 opinions of value. And they may be within 1 or 2 or 3% of each other. They may be within 10% of each other. Who knows? Depends on the scope and purpose of how that appraiser was directed to appraise.
Todd, what do you think about a baseball approach, or averaging the two of the three appraisals that are closest to in value to each other?
Well, it's not a bad approach, Robin, but again, that may be problematic because if the agreement was such that a third appraiser has to be chosen, and assuming this is already written, if you're writing a new document,
yep,
then I would say that's a fair approach. You're throwing out what I call the outlier, the wild card. Now, remember, it depends on who you're doing this for.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we do valuations for partnership interests, and I'm sure David or Brian may have told you, but we're the only company in the country that sells partnership interests in real estate. We have a distinct platform. It's called MIMIX, Minority Interest Market Exchange. We are the go-to people when it comes to, I have a 10% interest in an entity that owns the office building that you're in, and we need to sell it. So the biggest problem we find, be it in death, estate and trust, bankruptcy, whatever, partnership dissolution, is the value of that partnership interest. And that partnership interest can be valued 50 ways to Sunday. I mean, literally, we don't have a long enough time today for me to talk about that. But Robin, I think your approach is a fair one. Again, thinking about who ultimately 5 or 10 or 2 or 20 years from now is going to pick up that operating agreement and say, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. We haven't read this in 20 years, right? And as such, we now have to follow this, and who wrote this? I mean, I hear that every day because we value partnership interests and sell partnership interests, so it's quite common. But yes, it's a good question. A lot of thought has to be put into who you're representing. If it's the GP, well, the GP wants to have that control. Now, I'll say this in front of all of you, as experts selling partnership interests, one thing we've learned over the years doing so is a general partner is supposed to be a fiduciary. Rarely do they act as one.
Mm-hmm.
And they generally act as if it's their own piggy bank and they can buy that partnership interest out for $5 or $10 or whatever they think they can offer. Well, hence why you are all in business as well as us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the next slide, preparing for an appraiser.
Hey, Todd?
Yes, please go ahead.
We have a question.
Yes, please.
So going back to these agreements, I've drafted any number of them, and I always get pushback on baseball arbitration. I've always thought that the advantage of baseball arbitration is it keeps everybody honest, that they want to be as close to what a third party would think of valuation. On the other hand, what I've done otherwise is I provide that if the highest appraisal is within 95% of the highest of the two appraisals, it is within 95% of the lowest, you split the difference, because you're probably not going to get any closer anyhow, because it is, after all, an opinion of value.
I agree with you. That's a good approach. So you're doing some sort of averaging in some way. And that was my point. If you're using the third and you're averaging across the board, then yes, I agree with you. My point is you never want to take the third. And again, I shouldn't say never, because you're trying to accomplish something different for each client. So as such, strategically, you're all the geniuses, right? You're trying to figure out what's the best way to achieve what you want for your client. In that case, maybe that a third appraiser and opinion tops everybody and the rest go away is to your benefit. But I'm speaking more really about the situations that we see when it comes to resolving the problem. That third appraisal is the outlier and causes the big problem. And because of it, litigation continues. and the process, I mean, I'll be very candid with you. There's many times we're engaged. David could, probably laugh his head off at this because, we see this all the time. We're engaged to come in to do an appraisal because people cannot agree. And my opinion is save all the money with the appraisal process and all the time and the cost. That's pardon me, a waste of time. Because in the end, the market value is the arbiter of value. The market is, not the appraiser. And as such, when we do court-ordered sales, the purpose of the court-ordered sale is simple: find market value. So take it to market, let the parties who are all arguing, as I call it, overbid, or have a right of first refusal. Far more effective, far more cost-effective, and actually very accurate. We do this in our auction platform day in and day out. But we have a case right now that's moving upwards to a year of litigation because nobody could agree to the appraisal process and they're still litigating. I mean, my God. I mean, it's great. It's great for you all. But I just think, again, it's a lot of strategy and structure. Go ahead, please.
What was that?
Anybody had a question? Oh, so did I answer your question? I want to make sure I did, in your mind.
Yeah, right. I mean, when clients actually look at that provision, they think about what would, where they go. I mean, everybody knows that there have been appraisals that have been low, there have been appraisals that are high, and therefore they want to make sure that regardless of which side they're on, buyer or seller, that they're as close to market as possible.
Yeah, and again, using your approach secondarily to, or better or worse than Robin's approach, they're both good approaches to getting as close as you can. We have a case right now. It's a divorce. Client came to us, and they're trying to be very friendly. So I asked very simply, do you want this appraisal for both parties? Do you intend to sell the property, or do you intend to buy out the other property? Who's doing what? That's the first question. And when they answered that I may buy it, my husband may buy it, but we want to know market. Okay, so we're approaching the valuation as literally as if we were going to sell the property. That would be very different, right, if we were tasked with, no, my husband, he's the worst guy in the world, and I don't trust him, and I want you to value the property for me, and I want to buy the property, and you know where that's going. So again, it's how you tailor this. And one of the things about the slide that we're talking about now about expert testimony, I mean, even within our company, we've got some brilliant people. Some of them I would never want to put on the stand. They don't have that kind of personality. Others, they have great expertise being on the stand, and they know how to do that. So part of your analysis when you hire an appraiser for ultimately for testimony is not just asking the question of how many cases have you been on the stand for, but really getting a flavor for how they interact with you, what their personality is like, amenable, non-amenable, what are they showing the court? So, that's to me always a big part of the success of being the expert in court. It's not just the knowledge of the valuation or the asset, but it's also being a good salesperson. So I want to talk about just a couple examples. Anybody have any questions so far? Yeah, okay. So a case study, as you can see, this is an as-is vacant supermarket with a prospective value of the property in 2028 and a hypothetical tenant to establish the value because the property, as you understand, is vacant or dark. So what our goal is, I'm sorry, I got different one. So when we're tasked to do an appraisal, right, we're always tasked with different factors. Some of you who deal with retail or office, which are really problematic assets today, versus industrial, which is less so. How that valuation is to be used in the analysis and process. The analysis and process is always the same. It's the question of the facts that surround that property that we're trying to use and sometimes make, candidly, chicken salad out of chicken doo-doo, because sometimes we're not given very good facts or facts at all. So in this case of this example that you see on your screen, we were engaged, this was a bankruptcy case, we were engaged to prove the property was still viable and had value as a freestanding retail building versus, okay, it's going to be torn down and it'll have an alternative use, or it's going to become farmland, which happens. So in this example, we did look at the sales comparison and the income approach, and we researched and we found other vacant supermarket buildings within a regional area to support a market value. That's an interesting thing. I'm reading this. Here's a common question we get from professionals like yourself. Okay, we're valuing a shopping center in West Los Angeles. And the question we get is, well, the client who's a real estate expert has some properties in Long Beach, and they want us to use some of those properties that they know have traded potentially off market as part of the analysis for the sales comparison, and they're in Long Beach. So for all of you, how many of you, put your hands up, think a comp in Long Beach is the same comp as, so let's call it Bundy and Santa Monica Boulevard? Anybody think it's the same? That's what I figured. No, it's not. So geographic area is very, very important in appraising. And again, you may never look at those comps when you're reading the appraisal, but you really should, especially if you're on the opposing side, because you could pick that apart in a heartbeat, because the appraiser may not have had other comps to choose from. So they had to pick up Long Beach, but you could beat them down on the point. Why is Long Beach applicable to West LA? Well, there are reasons you could argue that they may be, but there's many that you can argue that they're not. So to this point, reading the comps, understanding comps, very, 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 very important in all aspects, whether it's cost, income, or market. Let's see. Here's a good example of another appraisal we'll talk about. Trust company engaged us for a unique property that was under construction, one of a kind property. This is not only a case that we valued it, but we actually sold this property that was in Big Sur, on the water. It's a story of stories I could get in. Really great story, but the result was the party who was building this architectural beauty literally on the bluffs in Big Sur, for any of you who know the area, had passed away, and the property was unfinished. And now the family, the trust, was burdened with determining what to do with this concrete architectural masterpiece, or in that case, the client kept calling it a mausoleum. So I can tell you without reading this, it was a nightmare, because there's no such thing as comps for an architectural sphere dome that was unfinished in Big Sur. Doesn't exist. It's a unicorn. So we had to tell the client, look, we can come up with the cost approach. So the construction improvements to finish the property, which we did. There was no income because the property was unfinished, and we were valuing it in two approaches: finished, unfinished. What was the estate going to do? Based upon the analysis that we provided them, I think the cost to complete was $3.5–4 million, if my memory serves, in addition to owning the land and the $2.5 million they had already spent. And by the way, this is for a property, and I believe it's still on our website. This is a property that was no more than 2,000 feet. I don't even think it was that big. It was all location. So in the end, what did we do? We were able to come up with a cost approach to finish the property, and a market approach, assuming it was complete, to sell. And we probably spent 5 months with the county of Carmel, Big Sur, planning department, contractors, trying to assess all of this information. It was very difficult. The conclusion, yeah, I was right, was the cost to build a 2,000 square foot property. Based on our evaluation, the client decided to sell the property in its as-is condition. So one of the most spectacular pieces of land that you can imagine being in Big Sur near the water, we were tasked, and because of our brokerage and auction expertise, we auctioned the property in its unfinished state and found a whole host of buyers throughout the U.S. and actually outside the U.S. And it was a competitive bidding process. We used our sealed bid platform and ultimately achieved a sale for the home in 60 days or less, whereby we assumed if we were the broker and just listed the property with a price, it could have been on the market for a year or longer. So in that case, we were a perfect solution for the client, but it had to start with valuation so they could figure out really what they had on their hands. So sometimes, really, depending on how you use the appraiser or the appraisal process, it can achieve the goal you want. Case study number 3. This is an interesting one. This is on an option to purchase, and this was a bankruptcy sale, and a client had the option to purchase a property, and or I wouldn't say bankruptcy sale, but a bankruptcy case, and the client had an option to purchase the property. So here's forward-thinking analysis for an appraisal, or for the appraiser and for the party that engaged us, what that property may be worth complete, because at the time that property had not been built, and it was, let's say, starting construction, but there was an option to purchase at a future point in time at a future price. So we were tasked with trying to determine if that price was within reason for the debtor or not, and was there equity for the debtor or not in that case, and for the trustee. So very complicated analysis, and we have somebody on our team, just so you know, that has a construction cost background, and that's really separate from the appraisal side of the business. And as such, we're able to use those skills when we need them for analysis on unfinished properties that may need to be valued finished, or at least understand what needs to be valued in a finished state. I'm just curious, how many of you on the call are familiar with cost segregation? Does anybody know? Two hands. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of deviate real quickly. For those of you who don't know cost segregation, you absolutely should. Why? Because you could advise your client on something they may not be familiar with that could make them a lot of money. And it is truly the last gift from Uncle Sam, as I like to call it, when it comes to ownership or immediate acquisition or acquisition through death of a property. And what cost segregation allows, it is exactly what you think it might say. It's segregating the cost of the property. So simply put, let's say you have a client who just bought a $50 million shopping center in Chicago. And they just bought the property, and they're going to allocate land and building for standard 39-year depreciation, straight line depreciation. I'm sure you're all familiar. Well, what Uncle Sam says you can do when you buy that property, you can do cost segregation, which allows you to separate the land value from the purchase price. So let's say, I'll give you a simple example, that $50 million shopping center that was paid, the assessor said the land was worth, well, being Chicago, let's say $20 million, or in that case, about 25% of the purchase value of the fee simple interest of the property. So what happens in cost segregation is we would come in and segregate out the improvements in that shopping center, parking lot stripes, HVAC, carpeting, lighting, hood systems, everything you can imagine. We segregate them out and put them into shorter life categories, 15-year, 7-year, 9-year, 5-year categories. As such, we're depreciating that HVAC system and saying it's not going to live 39 years, it's going to live 15. The parking lot stripes are going to live for 5 years. The carpet's going to live for 5 years, not 39 years. Well, then it becomes simple math. We engineer out these improvements. We put those into the building account. And now that buyer who bought that property, your client who just paid $50 million, instead of getting $400,000 first year depreciation, gets $700,000 first year depreciation. So what we do is we segregate the improvements in the building, and we push the value of the land down by doing a land appraisal. So that $50 million, if we could say the land is worth $10 million, now the building is worth $40 million. We depreciate the $40 million. So for those of you who don't know cost segregation, the minute your client either buys a property, inherits a property, or more importantly, at death, if the family had owned the property for 25 years and there's a first to die, that wife or husband, who's the second to die, who receives that, can absolutely start all over and reassess the property at market value as of the date of death. And more importantly, they can do cost segregation all over again. And I have to say to you how rare I find estate and trust attorneys and even real estate attorneys really know how to use cost segregation well, because it is really the last gift from Uncle Sam when it comes to acquiring real estate. But I bring it up because we were talking about segregating construction cost breakout. That's part of the analysis. The other is, of course, the land appraisal. So let me move on to, let's see if I've got, we're going to go back to this case study number 3 real quick, where we were talking about just appraising a property, and in some cases, we are asked through the income approach to use a DCF model, discounted cash flow model, to make assumptions on income in the future to arrive backwards at market value today. Are all of you familiar with the DCF model and how to use it? Anybody? So if we're making an assumption, if we're appraising a property and we're trying to look at what the value of that property may be 10 years from now, we have to make some assumptions on the rents. So we can index the rents, let's call it to CPI, which is pretty much the standard. Let's say 3% a year, but that hasn't been the case in the past few years. But let's say 3% a year, we can index them forward. And then if somebody were to buy the property today, we would discount it back to the present value to help arrive at what the value of the property would be, but understanding what the income might be over the next 5-10 years. So really what I'm saying to you is there's many ways to analyze a property in the past, currently, or even in the future. It's just a matter of what you're trying to achieve. You know, because we act not only as appraisers, but we also act as I said, on the sell side or the advisory side. If any of you have any questions, let me know. But one of the things we really try to do is help you all and guide you along really carefully. Yeah,
Can you hear us?
yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
I got a question for you. A lot of times when I'm negotiating a lease and like the client will say, and I'm representing the tenant, you know, if we can add 5 years of term to the lease, that's creating value for the landlord. Like, and I kind of have this general idea, but so for example, if I have a 3-year term, I'm a tenant, I've got a 3-year term, and then I add 5 more years to that from a value, like, you know, in kind of rough numbers, how does that affect your calculation? I know you're talking about now projecting rental income, but when you actually have a signed lease that's 8 years versus 3 years, how does that affect valuation?
Well, it affects it grandly if you came to me as a broker and said, Todd, we want to sell this building, and now we have Walgreens and they have an 8-year lease. You know, the first question we ask you all is, what is the term left on that tenant, right? What is their term? And if, let's say, inversely, they had a 3 or 2-year term, what do you think is the first question for the buyer or the potential buyer for that Walgreens is, when is Walgreens going to renew? Can we get them to renew now? Even though they only have 2 years left. And we get involved with triple net leases all the time, whereby you know, there's been 2 5-year extensions, there's another 5-year extension, but you know, they're into this year 4 years and there's 1 year left. And the tenant doesn't come back and say, yeah, we're going to renew, or especially in this market, they'd be idiots to tell you they're going to renew. They can negotiate 50 ways to Sunday. So the buyer then becomes very squirrely, and of course will hit the value of that property, making the assumption the Walgreens will not renew, or they may not even buy the property. So if you said to me, what's the value of a 8-year lease versus a 3-year lease when it comes to marketability of the property, you know, I'd probably tell you, depending on where the property is, I mean, there's so many variables, but it could be 5 to 20% in actual value today.
Right, but for your purposes and your standards that you have to follow, how is it, you know, what's the math? I mean, how is that technically done?
Well, okay, so remember, it's a question of the valuation date. If you said, Todd, we've got this triple net lease and Walgreens is a tenant, and we're valuing it as of today, and they have 3 years left in this, they have 3 years left in a 5-year option, and they have 1 more 5-year option. Would that negate or affect negatively the value on that of that property? Probably not. But if you said, Todd, we only have 1 year left. And that 1 year left is, then we would say very clearly, look, you got 1 year left on this lease. We don't know where they're going. So we would have to look at comparables that would have literally very little residual value left in that lease and try to make assumptions or adjustments on the sales comparison approach for that value of that property. On the income approach, well, it's very simple. Even though we're valuing it as of this day, right, based upon the income today, a year from now, that income hypothetically could be absolutely gone. It could be zero. So would the appraiser use that in their analysis? The answer is possibly. It depends on the purpose of the appraisal. Does that answer your question?
Craig, this came up, excuse me, Todd, this came up for me in that Netflix case I told you about.
Oh, yeah.
The issue was whether or not it was a financeable lease, and that might impact the cap rate that was applied to the value proposition. The broker involved said that, it had to be, 15, 20 years with a credit-worthy tenant. And the appraiser that we talked to, he wasn't as inclined to be as influenced by that, but he did indicate that the creditworthiness of the tenant would have an impact upon the cap rate that might be applied. So the more creditworthy it was and the longer the term of the lease, the lower the cap rate. That was how it was approached in the case that I just did.
Well, I would agree with what you're saying, and you're absolutely right. Does the creditworthiness of the tenant affect market value? Absolutely. There's no question about it. You tell me I'm selling a triple net Walgreens versus I'm selling Joe's Fish Shack that was known for making fish in southern Louisiana. Well, we're all smart people. Would you pay more for Joe's Fish Shack, who's been around for 20 years, or you pay more for Walgreens? You pay more for Walgreens. And as the appraiser will use those comparables and adjust accordingly. But for you talk about an interesting case there, Brian, for financing. I'm not necessarily, as a broker, would I absolutely agree with the term that other broker said. A 10-year term from a major, a Fortune 100, 500 company, that's a pretty darn long term. Now, sure, somebody would love to see 15 or 20 or 30 years, but that becomes unreasonable. I would tell you that effect might, that's really comes down to an opinion. And then how much you would negotiate with that lender, because each lender is going to have their own opinion. It's also like doing a ground lease. For those of you who are familiar with Palm Springs, most of that property is on leased land in downtown Palm Springs. And we sold many properties there, and the property has a 50-year lease. Lenders will loan on a 50-year lease without even question, as if it was fee simple. But we had a property that had, I think it was a 9 or 10-year term left on the ground lease, and the lender said, you've got to go back, and you have got to get an increased term on that lease for 30 years, or we're not lending. And in that case, that's what that client did. They went back to the Indian reservation, to that tribe, whoever it was, and they, negotiated, and they got that. So, yes, ground leases can have a big effect, and term can have a big effect on value. Very, very much so. I'm just curious, for all of you who are on the call, how many of you are involved with litigation with real estate? How many of you are involved with that?
We have one litigation partner.
One.
Not
Yeah.
intentionally.
Not intentional. Well, in this market, you will be very busy. How many of you are doing more just transactional?
Yeah.
The bulk of you. Okay. So, I always try to come to a client and be a value add service. That's our approach in our company and everything we do. And from a value add standpoint on you all to do transactional work, you know, if it's an acquisition, you know that you would never want to call us up and say, we need an appraisal done because our lender needs an appraisal for our client who wants to buy the property. Unless you're talking about Larry Ellison or somebody's got a net worth of, $500 million and does a ton of real estate transactions, FIREA requires that lenders hire and engage their own appraisers that are approved on their appraisal list. We happen to be FIREA lenders. We appraise for lenders. We're appraisers for lenders. So what I'm saying to you is you'd never call us up and say, Todd, we needed an appraisal done for lending purposes. The first thing we would say to you is, well, if we're not on that lender's approved appraisal list, you're wasting your money. Or you might say, which we did have a client 2 months ago and said, our client's buying a property, they want to get a loan, we need you to do the appraisal and the lender's going to accept it. And I said, are you sure? And they said, it's so-and-so, and here's the bank, and they're so-and-so, and their net worth is so-and-so, and if the bank wants the business, they will. I said, fine. I just don't want you to waste your money. So we'll do that appraisal for lender purposes. But it just goes to show all of you that there are so many different ways to use an appraisal, right? And for those of you who are transactional, there's lots of ways to do this and to use us, but also really, I would say to you, cost segregation, and we're happy to send you information on it if it's interesting for you. But that is, for you transactional attorneys, such an unbelievable benefit that makes you look great to your client.
Thank you so much. Sorry, we're running a little bit over time.
Okay,
So
no worries.
yeah,
Thank
but
you.
really appreciate you and David providing this presentation.
Well, it was our pleasure. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to David. We'll answer anything we can. And if we can give you our best advice and guide you along, we're happy to do it. And I think in that case, that might be the best value that we can help you with. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay.
Thank you. Have a good summer.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.